Jack, welcome to Chattanooga.
Thanks for having me.
I think about platform science. A couple of things. It arguably is the most successful venture-backed company in our space. That's the statement I'll make. You can either agree or dispute that.
I'll leave that. I think there's several that have done pretty well.
You have done exceptionally well. You guys, a year ago, announced what is arguably the most transformative transaction in telematics, which is the Trimble merged their telematics business into platform science. And now you're running the entire business that is the combination of your business as well as the Trimble legacy telematics business. What has that experience been like?
I think it was timely. I think if you look at the industry a year ago versus 3 years ago, there's a handful of folks that are now in significant positions at the top that didn't even exist 10 years ago. So I think when I look at it now, I had my reasons for wanting to do it, but having been through it, it puts us in a scaled position to have the kind of impact that we need to drive things forward in the way that we've always thought we needed to.
How did it come about? What was you had a pre-existing relationship? Did they, obviously the scale and the growth of your business, how did something like that come about?
Well, I think, they were actually our very first application partner. As some of you may know, we're a partner first platform. We built the company and the platform to allow third parties and shippers and fleets and tier ones and OEMs to have a place to bring and develop apps. And they were literally our very first one with ALK, the maps business. So we've known each other for a long time. They also have a bit of M&A DNA. They had a lot of assets in the company, and they were shifting their focus a little bit. We're running up against them quite a bit. And where they had shifted their roadmap several years earlier looked a lot like where we were headed. So it just made a lot more sense for both of us to work together in this way.
So the business now is, what size and scale? Do you guys talk about revenue numbers?
We don't. It's meaningful. It's global. We're in 14 countries. Oh. And we're in all segments and all sizes of fleets, but it's a decent size.
Now the at-road business as well get merged in, or is it just the
Trimble Mobility? So it's PeopleNet plus their next generation products, of which there were 2.
Got it. So now you've got this very large platform. What's the future roadmap for that business?
The future roadmap is the same as the roadmap has always been. Our goal was to make it a very liquid experience for developers who want to be able to create without having to know how every single truck works, every shipper works, every fleet works, and to create that ecosystem by just bringing barriers down, which I think the telematics industry, I like to tease people about the word telematics. Telematics is a description of a very limited number of data bits, which that's like saying that your phone was defined by whatever voice signals there were. It's just the very, very base elements of what we do here. But we're now seeing a large number of new folks making things that nobody thought of before, which was the entire point.
And it's really, your journey and mine were actually quite similar. You guys, I think your coming out party, maybe I'm wrong with this, was actually at our first event in 2018.
Yeah.
You guys were very early. It was interesting because there was a bunch of sort of future technologies like autonomous trucking and blockchain that were coming about. And then you had this edge computing device that you guys were like, look, ultimately the asset, it's not about just the J-bus, it's the entire information that goes into the truck and the vehicle and the trailer that actually matters. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of a mess of component providers providing their own. There wasn't really a central operating system for that, but you guys have invented that.
We certainly we started early, and that was the thesis. I think now with AI, it's becoming a little bit more relevant in the sense that reliable, consistent, accessible data with the appropriate controls is really that trust is the other part of the catalyst that AI brings from a technology perspective. So if you can't get it reliably and then prevent it from going the wrong places reliably, you can't really have an open ecosystem that invents things we hadn't thought of yet.
Now, Samsara went public 7 years ago, something like that. Was valued, I believe the number was valued a lot more exponentially than even the Trimble's core business, which is a much larger business. But talking to the folks that actually were involved in that transaction, they actually admitted to me that part of the sort of motivation was the discount that they were getting to their telematics business, that they felt like leveraging what you guys were building a pure play telematics business would provide a much better financial outcome than keeping it a part of this much larger sort of software as a service business. Is that sort of the calculation?
Well, I can't speak for their perspective. I think what I would say is, going back to my previous comment, anything, and I think Samsara's done a very good job of kind of educating the market that the TAM for telematics really doesn't describe the world that we're now in. Like here in this market, the digital supply chain connected to the greater supply chain beyond that, that's a different thing, right? Telematics, again, was a very finite world. And I think that was something that Samsara did a great job of priming the market for, that Trimble wasn't getting credit for.
Your background, and I know you and I have sort of a similar background. I think we met through Hearst. We have a large cap table that's quite similar. Yeah. Maybe you introduced me to Hearst.
Probably.
But ABC, Prologis, both investors in FreightWaves, also invested in Platform Science. It's interesting because the businesses have right time, right place, right development. But you actually got your start in media. You were at News Corporation, if I'm not mistaken, and you actually were the internal founder, because it was a big conglomerate that brought a bunch of companies to Hulu. You actually launched Hulu, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was on the team that did that, yes.
Okay.
I was brought in to do that.
What was it like being in media? And didn't you do the MySpace transaction?
That's another story. I was there for that, yes. I think thematically, and I was in the military before that, so I think I've managed to walk into situations just as they were changing over and over again. So I think the MySpace and Hulu stories, which were happening at the same time, are really interesting because they both speak to, thematically what I think we're seeing in this industry, which is what's the difference between innovation and disruption, right? And what defines those. So people know Hulu. They just recently finally sold to Disney, who was the reticent partner that came in last. And that was a $30 billion difference in outcome, but arguably not value destroying for them at all. In the absence of that, and the folks that were not participants, everybody in the entire industry was involved in sort of the negotiated business plan. I came from the internet world where I had done something like that earlier, which is how I got brought in. And I didn't have the constraints of the rules that they had. So the time was right. And the three ultimate leaders, which was David Zaslav, Peter Chernin was really driving from the News Corp Murdoch seat, and then ultimately Bob Iger. They recognized that if they didn't do it, there was no outcome that was going to be favorable. And because they decided they could change an industry because of the heft that they had. So that's an example of a leadership-driven disruption. They kind of forced that.
What was the impetus for Hulu? Was it just that over-the-top streaming was becoming the thing, and they felt like the music...
Over the top hadn't quite even become a term yet. It was post Napster, but now YouTube was showing up. Google TV, which people don't remember, that was a thing, and Amazon and again Apple. They were showing up and poking the bear a little bit and making claims that they were going to do things, and nobody really knew how to respond. And the normal response is to entrench and sue and do everything else. And working with the folks I worked for, particularly Rupert, he was never a fan of that. He's just like, well, find a way to outrun them. What do we have that they don't have? And it turned out what we didn't have was scale. Even the big studios, they realized they needed each other. So in a rare moment of alliance, they decided that they would disrupt themselves, independent of the outcome, or be disrupted. And they did. And in the absence of doing that, I think they wouldn't. The system wouldn't exist at all, because Netflix, as the buying power was so significant, or it was anticipated to be, that they knew their time. If they didn't have a counterbalance, they wouldn't have a seat at the table.
I gotta ask this because my dad was in the formation of Transplace. So J.B. Hunt, Swift, U.S. Express, Warner, MS Carriers, and Covenant merged with logistics operation because it was in '99, I believe. They realized that the internet had the potential to disrupt trucking. Mm-hmm. And they created Transplace, and he said it was the most dysfunctional board that you could ever imagine, because you had six of the biggest egos in the industry, my dad included in this, six of the biggest egos in an industry that were competing.
Yep.
And then you had a third-party entity that was called Transplace that was trying to run an independent business, and it was so dysfunctional because these companies hated each other, and they ultimately did not want this upstart to actually win. Was that a similar experience at Hulu?
100%. And I think the difference there is they knew it. So once we pulled the deal together, there was one more step. And that step was we brought in Providence Equity Partners as a financial investor and created a bunch of minority controls and supermajority rights, veto rights, essentially, on things that we could anticipate. It was my job, coming from outside the studio system, to say, what would these folks do on their worst day to each other? And then set up controls to allow this minority investor to block those things. And that was one of the most interesting parts of it, because we figured it out. And everything we thought would happen did happen. And they were blocked at every turn, so they ended up having to go the distance.
So finally, Hulu's going. It was successful for many years,
Yeah.
and then it feels like technology and the market sort of caught up to where the studios themselves sort of took a life on their own. Disney now is shuttling what is the legacy Hulu assets.
Well, they're not shuttling it; they've absorbed it into what they do.
But it's Disney Plus, right?
Yeah, but everyone is natively digital. The difference there, when we started, everyone had a subscale or multiple attempts at doing their own streaming services. You might have had the sports division doing something, the entertainment division doing another, an independent production company selling a show doing. It was chaos. It looked a lot like trucking, and they finally realized: A, we're basically gonna run out of money failing. B, we're letting one or two or three players run away without us. So I know trucking is competitive. The media is a very cutthroat place.
Yeah.
But it is run by hyper-rational people. And that is an example where you won't find many others, where they said it's either we do this or we're not going to be here. And then they absolutely shoved it straight down from the top.
But I think in some ways, media has an advantage that it's in many ways an oligopoly. I mean, the big media companies are, a dozen maybe that sort of control the 95% of the revenues in media controlled by these big entities. Trucking doesn't work that way. Trucking is a much more fragmented market where it's actually the small carriers that sort of dictate or have a massive amount of market share. It's, the top 10 carriers have 12% market share. It's a very different market. How do you sort of see these markets? Where are the similarities?
Yep.
Where are the differences?
So here's what's missing in there. And this was a tough part to sell. This was coming from the outside. I was able to do it. There was no brand loyalty. Unless you're watching kid shows on Disney, there was nothing about the individual networks that people cared about. They watched the shows they wanted to watch. If you had football and somebody else didn't, you're out of luck. It was about the content. And the content providers are actually your analog for the more mid-market folks that have the deep relationships
It was the studios themselves, right?
It was production companies, studios.
They're the ones that actually, and so is the value in media more of the content library? Is that where the whole value is?
Well, that was the theory back then.
It doesn't work?
The theory is, well, in practice, the audience is always the asset, right? And it's temporal. Unlike even trucking, you can just change a channel or whatever you want to call it these days. But because of that and the self-awareness that audiences were fickle, they thought a lot harder about how to protect themselves.
So let's move into the trucking business. You and I could spend hours on media, but I imagine this audience doesn't care as much about it as I do or you do. What was it from your experience at Hulu, and MySpace for that matter, in the media business that you've now taken to the trucking? Where are the things that you find sort of similar trends that sort of helped you build this remarkably successful company?
Well, a couple things. One of them was achieving scale beyond what people think scale is. So we talked about, you mentioned Samsara and their market cap and the TAM. I would never spend 5 minutes of my life as an investor or an entrepreneur working on someplace where I could define the total addressable market. It's crazy. You're basically saying it's never going to be any bigger than this. I know everything, and I have a strategy to get there. That's pretty naive. Secondly, it's not that interesting. And in a world where technology changes the way you think about problems in an increasingly shorter cycle, it's also it's a little unimaginative to think you could do that. So I'm going to give you an example with MySpace and talk about where that one fell short because of that. So disruption takes two things. It takes two sets of things. Three things have to happen at the same time, not one. And I'll explain that in a minute. The other is time. right? Because over time, when you said translate started because of the internet, think about that. The internet, we're all hosed, all right? That's like saying AI, we're all going to lose our jobs. It's a thing. It's the collection of things. So MySpace, people knew what social media was in a rough way. There was Friendster and LinkedIn and other places like that, but who cared? Then broadband became ubiquitous and people started putting a lot of pictures up. They put some videos up, they put some music up. People thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Then, this thing happened, right? And when this thing happened, it changed everything because it changed the volume that people could consume and the ease that people could develop and distribute. So we had already educated people that they wanted something like social media, and we already connected the pipes, so it was physically and economically possible. But once we made it ubiquitous, both ways, user and developer, that's when you got there. But all those three things were required. So, and then the time part is, if you get that wrong, as MySpace did, they built the greatest PC-enabled experience. They thought they bought Photobucket. They thought they were competing with Adobe. And they thought they were competing with AOL and Yahoo, and they were. But once this thing happened, people put it together. This is easy. I can use it all the time, and the rest is history. So similarly, when we look at our industry, what are those three things, right? And I think that people confuse innovation with disruption.
So is your statement that Facebook figured out mobile and that's the reason they're successful? Why did Facebook win? I mean, News Corp bought $700 million from MySpace?
512.
512. And within a year, it felt like, maybe it was 3 years.
It was 3 years.
Couple years.
Yeah.
It just fell off the face of the earth. And
it was entirely tied to this.
The mobile phone killed MySpace.
MySpace had the world's greatest BlackBerry app. I'm sure many of you used it. So they just missed it, right? Because Facebook was constrained. They didn't have a lot of money. So it was like 2008. They were almost toast, and Microsoft put a last-minute investment in them. It was a plain vanilla thing. It was the antithesis of what people thought social media was, and MySpace was like trucks filled with different stuff that didn't belong together, right? And people made their own pages, and they all looked different, and the back end had to support all this crazy stuff. It was expensive. It was not predictable. And ultimately, it wasn't economically scalable, even though users wanted it.
So how did MySpace miss this? I mean, you have some of the smartest media executives on the planet, almost unlimited funding relative to that. Where did they go wrong? Where did MySpace go wrong? That you said the mobile phone, but that was obvious. That is hindsight's 2020.
Yep.
It's obvious looking at it now that it was headed to a mobile phone. How did
mobile phones existed? It was this, and the difference here was MySpace was just too complicated to be consumed in a mobile phone environment. Its complexity was the attraction. Its customizability, its unpredictability. That's why people did it. But then they realized we don't need all of this. We need these 5 things, and Facebook didn't have the capacity to do any more than that. They picked the 5 things that people cared about.
They were super constrained.
Yeah.
Amazing. So how does that, as a founder, what did you take from that experience as you built Platform Science?
One, if you're not a platform, you better be the world's greatest and continue to be there at one thing. Nobody can do 10 things or 50 things great. That just doesn't work like that. It shouldn't, really. It's a focus issue. And 2, understand the difference of where the line is. Like where is a platform and where is a service or an app or an extension or whatever that is, and where do you want to be? And the where do you want to be part is the part that scales, the part that's invisible, the part that's often unbranded and definitely not sexy. It's how do you make it as easy as possible for everybody else to do what they want to do? Because that's the only way to enable the maximum ecosystem.
And you're talking about be a platform or a brand, is that sort of the way the world works?
Yeah.
And if you're a platform, you're enabling other businesses to be successful, which is effectively what you guys did at Platform Science, right?
Yeah.
And the incumbents that were there, Omnitrax, I mean, you could argue Samsara got there, was it earlier, perhaps, Keep Trucking was a little earlier, started at the same time, but a little bit earlier than you guys. Is your sort of view is that, and maybe even Trimble at the time, was not doing that, and that's how you guys were successful?
Well,
was it a closed ecosystem?
They were all closed ecosystems, by definition. So we built day one, even the apps that we did have, because when we entered the market, we had to have a core set to, pick up enterprise customers without leaving them stranded. We separated the part of those businesses right away. So our hours of service workflow teams are separate. They were app developers. They had no more or less access to the platform tools than third parties do by design, which you can imagine early on, that felt a little weird. But that was a discipline because my view was, if it won't work for us, why would we expect it to work for anybody else?
Yeah.
And I'm not 20 years old. When I started this thing, I had already learned all these mistakes. I had made most of these mistakes, if not more. So I was like, if we have to do it right now, and if it doesn't work now, I don't want to go any further. So that was the first thing that we did.
So you were effectively competing, or your partners were competing against some of your core technologies.
And continue to, right out the gate.
And was it? But that was okay because it enabled the platform to be better. Did you start prioritizing, saying, look, we're going to focus on these things, and everything else is going to be developed by third-party developers?
Oh, well, it was, I would say it was more of a minimum bar. It's like, what will it take us to sell into the enterprise? And do we have an internal application and or a partner or set of partners to solve those problems? We had to get to the base level parity. So at that time, it was Trimble, Verizon, Omnitrax, Teletrack, Telogis. People had to move from something. So you had to at least have what they had. It could have been from partners, it could have been proprietary, but it was almost in every case, it was both.
Jack, why didn't they see that? I mean, these companies are massive. Is this disruption happening? The iPhone has certainly opened up this app store concept. Was it just that, is this sort of the innovator's dilemma problem where when you're so big, you don't think that these new up and coming ideas are going to disrupt you? Or what is the primary sort of?
I would say, yes, it's the innovator's dilemma, but it's not, you don't see. It's you don't do. Like when you have a business, Qualcomm owned Omnitrax, Verizon owns Verizon, they collected all those assets. It's a very different thing to be a founder-driven company without any, I won't call it baggage, but they had the responsibilities of maintaining what they had. So if you had to invent this as a sidecar project to a $500 million, SaaS, well, by the way, when we started, SaaS was not a word used in this industry. These businesses, going back 20 years, sold you hardware and a maintenance fee, which we now know is recurring services and SaaS. So they just simply didn't have I wouldn't say they didn't have the capability. They were busy. They were busy maintaining what they had and doing what we do. As you know, you've met enough entrepreneurs, most fail. Mm-hmm. So, but all the investments are significant, both in time, reputation, and whatever else. And if you're running one of those companies, guess who's going to go internally build those products? Your best people.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's really the innovator's dilemma. It's not that they're, psychologically or philosophically committed. It's they have to keep doing what they're doing. Unless you built a business designed to change every day, which is what platforms do, you're in some form of that.
Can you explain that, what you mean by platforms?
Yeah, a platform is the thing that doesn't change when you change everything else whenever you want to. So your iPhone is a perfect example of a platform. It's not even a complex platform. If you don't like Uber, you use Lyft. Somebody comes up with something better, you just choose. You don't replace your hardware. You probably don't even know when the operating system gets updated. It's probably automatic. You don't care. Your payments are there, your ID's there. Everything to enable somebody to provide you a service is contained in that phone. But very few of you are probably using Apple Mail, Calendar, or even Apple Music, right? People forget that, right? But we talk about TAM, 20 years ago, when people talked about phones, they talked about ARPU.
Yeah.
How much ARPU does AT&T or Verizon have? I challenge any of you to figure out what your phone actually costs you on a monthly basis. You'd have to add all that stuff up. I mean, so the world just changes in that way. And the choices are now yours, and it's no longer your phone bill. It's your lifestyle bill.
And I think Apple, 40% of Apple's revenue is apps?
And growing.
Yeah, it's like their third-party app center actually drives the majority of the revenue, which is insulated. And in terms of platform science, you guys have this edge computing platform that connects all the devices. Where do we go from here? Like, what's the next step in that business?
Well, we've always believed that the OEMs and the vehicles and the trailers and the tier one supplied pieces of that, there's really the logical end state is they all come together. So that when you develop an application or when you're running your business, you have a complete data picture consumable the way you want to consume it, to make decisions you want to make them. And your business is differentiated by how you use your tools. Today, the world is giving you a huge toolbox with metric and standard tools, and they don't all fit together, and you don't know which is which. So I think that's how I see that developing.
So the future of, you kind of tease this out, is I've used the term telematics. I think that would be the definition. If you were a Nike's code, that's probably where you fit in that world. But how do you guys, the future is not telematics is what you're saying.
No.
The future is an application layer platform.
We'll put it this way. I think about, let's take autonomy. A few years ago, autonomy and EVs, right? Biggest topics in trucking. This should be, right? It affects how you use those vehicles. But the reality is, if you assume that you've driven all the cost out of the actual operation of the vehicle, where are you, right? How does that change transportation beyond affecting those costs? Where I see this going is the way trucks fit into a larger system, fully connected, when everything is reliable, transparent, and consistent, is going to just change the way everything flows. Because right now, even when we're tracking trucks or replacing drivers with assisted technologies, it doesn't change the mystery of, from the beginning to the end of a product's life cycle. It's not optimized for when does that truck drive, not just for compliance. What hours of the day? What roads does it use? What are the external impacts of that? Are we consuming everything optimally? Now, what works like that? The internet. The internet works exactly like that. Every packet has a header. Every header tells it where to go based on its value and priority. So there's so much room when the vehicle becomes part of a larger system, and those trade-offs can be made in real time.
So as we move to an autonomous world or semi-autonomous world, the vehicle edge computing platform becomes exponentially more important.
It's otherwise you have 4 million robots with no brains.
Yeah.
It's
an important element. So you and I had this conversation backstage. I think the last time that you were here was a couple years ago. You certainly were in 2018, one of our best in shows. You had an impressive setup. We talked about the fact that a lot of the companies that had joined us in 2018, 19 are no longer around. What do you observe as someone who's actually thrived in this environment? What is different about platform science than some of these other startups that you saw?
Well, a couple things. There's a number of ways you defend yourself over time. One is to be highly differentiated. That usually requires you doing something else that nobody either wants to do or has too much sense to try, right? So things that take a long time to do are not super attractive places to invest your resources or your career, so you don't get a lot of those. But most really important things take 10, 15 years to really get to the point where those three things I talked about, time plus the other constraints, come together. So it's figuring out how not to do something that's too sexy, too flash in the pan, too obvious. What's the non-obvious thing? And then it's still a bet. It's still a coin toss. You're either right or you're wrong. Ultimately, that's the only probability there is.
AI would be one of those things right now, right? Mm-hmm. Every pitch deck I see, a large percent of the companies here are AI enabled. Slap an AI thing on your pitch deck, you can double the valuation or triple it. It feels like at some point there will be a washout of those services, and we'll go through another cycle of sort of replacing it. What are the things that are going to be successful? When we get through this AI bubble and it pops, what is going to sustain?
A few answers to your question. First of all, knowing your business, transportation, knowing your customers, knowing your business, knowing your lanes, knowing what you move, and having those relationships are not going to be very easily displaced. Understanding the right use of AI tools will make a good business better, but it won't make a bad business good, right? So there's no near-term concern there. But a good business that becomes a great business is going to have a significant advantage if they use these tools correctly. There's not going to be a third-party app that comes in and takes over freight because of AI. I don't see that happening. It's a collection of things. As I mentioned, the vehicle is a part of this. It's all the things around it that have to get optimized to make it really work. And the people that know their business and can consume those things the best are going to be at a huge advantage. Not not necessarily the people who bring those new tools to the table.
So Jack, I get asked this and I'm sure you do even more so than I do, and perhaps you're closer to the conversation than I am. When are autonomous trucks happening? Truly autonomous, omniscient, aware trucks that can drive themselves.
Yeah.
How far?
Again, I have a controversial opinion about that. I say
controversy is good.
Yeah, look, to me, given what I just told you, autonomy is a very powerful feature. It is an innovation, not a disruption. Innovations are something you can choose to participate in or not, depending on how well. If you have these lanes with these customers for 50 years moving this product, you're in good shape. Innovation might make that better. Disruption is when you no longer have a choice. When the world changes such that autonomous trucks connected to an autonomous operating system for the supply chain, well, then you got to be on that train. That's many clicks beyond.
You think we're 5-10 years out before that?
What I just said?
Yeah.
Oh, at least 10.
So the whole thesis that in 2030 we're all going to have driverless trucks that are ubiquitous on every lane in the country.
Well, the way I think about it is, if you're sure that when your truck without a driver gets to the destination in the middle of the night, another robot's going to unload that truck and put it on a pallet, put it on another truck, until everything is autonomous, it's very difficult for anything to be autonomous economically.
Especially with all the exceptions that happen in freight and all the things. One of the big emerging problems, and perhaps the fastest growing industry in our logistics, is fraud. Freight fraud specifically. What is platform science doing to help mitigate freight fraud and help fleets fight this pervasive problem?
I think what we've seen is a proliferation of people providing, I wouldn't call them point solutions, but sort of. Fraud exists because of a lack of transparency, like a lack of available data. It wasn't that hard. But as you do connect trucks, long before you get to autonomy, right, there's sensors can tell you how much fuel should be there, how much fuel came off a pump, how much fuel should be required for this route. All these things are knowable. So the ability to police these things, I'm speaking about fuel, but whether it's freight, loads, whatever, transparency is going to increase as a category very quickly, and fraud then becomes easier to police. You can't keep people who are clever. We saw the Louvre get robbed yesterday, right?
Yeah.
People are always going to find a way to steal stuff, but it's been remarkably easy historically.
In broad daylight.
You betcha.
And it looks like right out of a movie where they took a ladder and looks like a construction crew.
Probably came
like
in.
Hollywood. It was a very Hollywood-esque view. The great question I have on freight fraud is, at what point does the market shift from where shippers start to actually demand more information about the carriers down to the unit?
Yeah.
Are you seeing that happen, or is that coming?
Well, I think that's entirely a function of the cost and availability. You can put, a phone on a SKU, on a pallet, in a truck, and seal it, right? It's really a function of cost, right? So as the technologies, nothing I said there hasn't been invented yet. It's getting to the right scale, making them consumables. Trailers is, I think, the biggest complexity that I see that is not easily solved by tech is the ownership model for trailers, right? You can do a lot with a tractor, but trailers, the source of that load in that trailer and the pallets on that load, and that is the ambiguity that allows all that stuff to have this slop in the system. And those are things that technology will presumably, I can't give you the exact outcome, perfect when people can match cost with risk. Right now you can't. It's an actuarial model. We're probably going to lose 9%, and so bake it into the price kind of thing.
Which is quite insane. And it's those actuary tables have to be breaking right now because of the substantial cost. But it's, like you said, it's a lack of transparency, and it's a lack of knowing who your counterparties are.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we're only as good as the driver. Like, it doesn't matter whether you give a load to a Knight, a US Press, or Jim Bob Trucking, or whomever. If that driver decides to do something nefarious with that load, something nefarious is going to happen. And it's ultimately, how do you know and verify the driver is who they say they are and the freight is hauled the way it's supposed to be hauled?
Again, having one source of truth, one network where everything is connected on the vehicle, all those things are possible. It's a question of adoption, implementation, and that's usually driven by cost on one side, for both the shipper who's going to ultimately pay for that at some level and the carrier who has to implement those
Do you
things.
think we'll ever get to a point where hours of service are eliminated and it's driver health monitoring that we get to, or you think that?
I can't speculate. I mean, you're asking a regulatory question, so I'm not going to go near that.
I mean, the technology's there, right? To monitor driver health and well-being. Are you guys connecting those things yet?
We are not. That's a third-party application type of thing.
That is connected into the.
People can do that now.
Yeah.
So there are very few technology things that don't exist yet. It's a question of adoption and integration into a common platform so it's trustworthy.
So Jack, I'd like to take us into the future a little bit. And 5 years from now, I'm going to have you back. What has changed over the next 5 years, or has changed if we look back? Where are we at? Like, where is the industry at that point?
In 5 years?
5 years.
A lot of it depends on political environment, to be honest, right? Because there's different ways you get disrupted. Either you do it yourself or someone else does it, right? And that's a function right now, a little bit of the environment we're in. I would say that vehicles, I haven't described anything that isn't obvious. If the vehicles produced by OEMs and consumed by this industry aren't the effective robots we're talking about, somebody else is going to introduce them. Nothing needs to be invented. It's a pure adoption thing. Who are the drivers of that adoption? Who can assist with that? OEMs play the biggest role. And I think second to that is the people who buy those vehicles, right? Having that expectation, you're driving around with flip phones right now. You should be driving iPhones. That's how I think about it. And that's all the things we talked about are extensions that live in a world where that platform technology already exists. And fundamental to that are the vehicles and the trailers that you buy.
So who is MySpace in this world? In trucking, who is the MySpace that?
Well, I can assure you that MySpace didn't know they were MySpace. So I don't think I want to ascribe that right now. What I do think is the world now, the folks that are here now that weren't here 10 years ago, are actually not competitive. We compete, but not in the ways you think. Everybody exists for a reason, and they do something at a very deep level that will sustain. Providing connectivity and a common source of data, and all, that's a little bit like AWS. That's what we think we do with a platform on top of it. It's not something that everybody needs to do. Every one of those businesses thrives whether they consume that or source it themselves.
I think, it's interesting how much the industry feels like it's changing, but I've been in this industry my whole life, and how when I was doing some stories on Yellow bankruptcy, I went back through a bunch of newspaper articles, and I was reading these old trucking newspapers from 1960. 1970, and it was talking about this, and you could have taken and copied and pasted the same discussion, the interviews of the truckers from 1960, and I could have told you it was from yesterday, and you would have believed it, because it said drivers are complaining about the government, number one, fuel prices, insurance, and pay, essentially. The same thing in the 1960s. So those fundamentals will always be there, is the industry. But at the same time, there's all this technology that's coming in that is disrupting, but it still feels like in many ways we're sort of, as you mentioned, we're staying in the same place. We're doing the same things. And ultimately nothing is changing until we actually adopt these new platforms or get rid of a factor like the truck driver.
Mm-hmm. Without talking about who we get rid of or not, I think going back to the beginning of this conversation, change like that happens in an industry that's this complex when folks who have enough vertical influence make it happen, right? So we talked, I listened earlier, every carrier of every size matters. But folks who wield the most influence over the most parts can affect this. And I think if large fleets or well-run, mid-sized fleets adopt these technologies, the improvements, are to the left of the decimal point, not to the right. I mean, these are things that change the economics of your business, but no one's fully embraced that yet. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Many are getting there.
On the cost side, or
on the cost side?
It's all about. Trucking's a cost business.
Yeah.
And so it's that unit economics that you're able to get through the technology that actually drives the value.
Yeah, and I think that at some point there's an escape velocity where folks that are at a large enough scale who adopt enough of these things have a cost advantage that either forces people to follow or other.
So we had Don Everhart earlier, who was at Swift, is now at TransFlow talking. He and I had a moment to share about the challenges of selling into trucking. You've built a very successful business of selling into fleets of all sizes. I remember, 4 or 5 years ago, early on in the journey of platform science, someone on your team said the biggest surprise was how much the fleets love to negotiate.
That wasn't me.
I can't remember who it was, but it was the fact that the big fleets love negotiating. Is that still the case?
I think everyone loves to negotiate. I don't know who said that, but that doesn't seem to be much of a revelation. I think listening to that earlier conversation you had, I think what is not more the surprise, but a consideration is how many buyers there are for one product, right? The negotiation isn't just with the company, it's often amongst the stakeholders. And it's complex because they need things for different reasons. I think in the last 10 years, the role of the CIO in the trucking fleet has evolved considerably. They're not managing laptops and phones, they're strategically laying out the roadmap for where the business goes. That is a buyer. So is safety, so is operations, so is HR. So it's a complex